My guests this week are Stuart Swezey and Bruce Licher. Stuart is the producer-director of the Punk Desert Festival documentary Desolation Center, chronicling his early career organizing events featuring groups such as Sonic Youth, Survival Research Laboratories, Swans, Savage Republic, Minutemen, Meat Puppets, Einsturzende Neubauten, capturing a time when pushing the boundaries of music, art, and performance felt almost like an unspoken obligation. Swezey is also the co-founder and publisher of the influential LA-based underground bookstore and press, Amok Books. Bruce Licher founded Independent Project Records in 1980 to release his music on vinyl records with his own artwork and design. For more than 40 years, he has crafted creative sounds as a guitarist with Savage Republic, Scenic, and other bands. He soon expanded the catalog to include other musical groups on the cutting edge of the independent underground rock scene. And his letterpress printed designs gave IPR releases a visual trademark as distinctive as any other iconic label such as 4AD or Factory, gaining Grammy nominations for his design work on albums by Camper Van Beethoven and Four Against. Licher is now collaborating with fellow musician Jeffrey Clark on a revitalized Independent Project Records, releasing expanded gems from the archives of IPR's catalog alongside new, previously unreleased recordings. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Stuart Swezey and Bruce Licher. Hey.
Hey.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
A pleasure.
I, had the Sonic Youth VHS.
Gila Monster Jamboree.
Yes, I had that on VHS at the video store. And Bruce, I had, your records of Savage Republic and the stuff you did with Camper Van Beethoven. I'd heard about Desolation Center. I didn't know that you'd worked together. When did you guys meet?
Bruce, am I right that it was probably something like at the Anti-Club when Savage Republic was playing?
I mean, I think that it was after your trip to Mexico, and you called me. You got my phone number and called me up, and had with the idea of doing a show in the desert.
Right. So I guess I was a fanboy, and I'd seen Savage Republic live, and I had the record, and I guess we had never actually met until that time. Yeah. So
that's how I remember.
That sounds absolutely right.
So when Savage Republic were first starting these shows, I don't know, how would you describe your guitar sound?
The guitar sound that we used from close to the beginning were directly inspired by Glenn Branca. What got me to go buy a guitar was the No New York album that Brian Eno produced of the No Wave bands. And something finally clicked in my head listening to DNA and Mars that were just these really just interesting sound constructions. And it finally clicked, I could do that. It's just get these simple layers of things and put them together. And so, I knew that Glenn Branca was somehow involved with that scene. And when I saw, I was at UCLA, in the art department, somebody had put a flyer up for a gig that he was doing at Cal Arts in Valencia, north of Los Angeles. And I decided to go out there and see it. And I was just blown away by the sounds that they were getting. And when I realized that they were playing with guitars that had all the same strings on them, all tuned to the same note, I was just like, I got to do that. And I literally drove home and restrung my guitar.
So, Stuart, did you see Savage Republic quite a bit?
I can't say that I saw them, that many times before we did the Desert show, but yeah.
Right. So at the beginning of the documentary, you're showing footage by the Minutemen, 45 Grave, Joanna Went. Were these accessible all-age shows, or were they mostly taking place in bars?
Well, I think the thing was that some of those shows were places like the Whiskey A Go-Go, that was the Sunset Strip or the Roxy even. And so they served food. So technically it was okay to have people that were underage.
Okay.
But also I think when you hit about 16 in Los Angeles, you were going to try to make a fake ID. And so a lot of times I don't remember what the particular rules were, because, you would just use a fake ID that you did by cutting up a couple driver's licenses and things like that. Because that was sort of necessary. But as far as the all age thing goes, I remember going up to, see bands and not having to worry about that. Although there was also places like the Masque that, were sort of legendary venues where they were just so underground that nobody was checking, or the Brave Dog, which was behind the Atomic Cafe in Little Tokyo. I mean, I remember it was like $5. I was still in high school, and it was also all the beer you could drink, and 5 bands, and so that kind of thing existed back then too.
The Brave Dog was actually where Savage Republic played its first show. We had set up a gig at this little storefront art gallery, and the art gallery went under like 2 weeks before the show, or a week before the show, and so we needed to find another place to put on the show. And we heard about the Brave Dog, and so they said, so we got their number and we called them up and they said, yeah, you can rent the space for $100 and put on your show. And I think we brought in $102, so we didn't lose money. We were able to do the show. 25 or 26 people showed up.
Some things don't change.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the documentary is amazing because there's so much access. There's so much footage. When you were putting this film together about, your guys' collaboration, and we'll get into, what exactly it were you surprised at how well it was documented?
I mean, part of the footage I knew existed, and it was just a matter of finding the people and getting them to allow me to digitize and things like that. The thing that shocked me, honestly, was the amount of photography that had been done and how really talented a lot of those people were. And so that became a big part of the visuals as well. But I feel really lucky, because these were, kind of events that were really done on the fly and things like that. And the fact that we were able to have footage for all these different events, or at least really good photography, made it work as a film. Also that there was audio, that
Yes.
there was live recordings that we could access, so it was fortunate for sure.
Well, let's get into the genesis of how this all came to be. Watching the film, it seems like a big reason was the police presence at the shows and the violence that was starting to happen at these LA punk shows, and trying to find a venue in LA where you wouldn't get beat up or hassled or have it broken up. Can you remember when you started noticing the police presence come into the scene?
I mean, I guess for me, it seemed like there was kind of like a golden era, like 77, 78, 79, where that wasn't going on. And then at some point, Daryl Gates, who was the, chief of police, it seemed like the word was out, like, we have to stop punk rock. We have to stop these anarchists. And all of a sudden it was just like very different atmosphere. And so that was right around the time that I think I was starting to think, oh, I'd like to put on some gigs, and I could do these, small venues and stuff like that around LA, in sort of remote places that are not that remote nowadays. I guess there was a lull. Anyway, that was my feeling, was like it was really getting more and more difficult. And so as a promoter, I kept having shows shut down at some point or other, sometimes right at the beginning, sometimes you'd get through most of it. And but the really super violent stuff, I think, wasn't all the time, but it definitely was scary to have, cops with nightsticks and things like that, just wailing on kids. These are literally middle school kids.
Yeah, there's a quote in the film where someone says it was tactical violence on children using militarized police.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book called City of Quartz by Mike Davis. That's sort of a radical left wing history of LA. And one of the things he talks about is how they used the Vietnam era pacified Hamlet technique in South Central, but it was that sensibility of like, hey, let's get, helicopters overhead, and we'll, use extreme force and SWAT teams to shut down a nightclub. I mean, none of it really made a lot of sense, but I think it was just fear,
Yeah, my first visit to LA was the first time I saw police helicopters with lights. And I just was like, it was like I was in a movie. I'd never seen that Just it was very, very eye-opening. Also, that you had Action News was also very impressive in LA. I was like, wow, they report on like car wrecks and stuff, and then it's just like so normal now. But at the time, I was like, wow, LA's intense.
Yeah, I mean, and it wasn't that far from where Black Flag headquarters, in the South Bay to, Compton, where NWA came out of. And, all these things I think were more, like the Rhodium swap meet where they would sell the NWA tapes. All those things came out of the same vibe. I mean, it was obviously far worse for people of color and, in neighborhoods that really had that kind of strong police presence. But I think we all felt it.
It sounds like a big turning point for you also was the Throbbing Gristle show in 1981. Bruce, did you get to see Throbbing Gristle?
I did, yeah. So Michael Shepard was the person who promoted that show, and he and Stuart and I were the three that got together and rented space in the Nate Starkman building in 1980. What was that? 4, 3, 4? Or no, it was 1983.
Yeah. Well,
or no, it was after. Anyway, 1984. Actually, I think it was the beginning of '84 when we got together and did that. But I remember, being in touch with Michael before that, and I was at the show, the Throbbing Gristle show. And the interesting thing is that that afternoon I was coming down with like a really bad flu of some sort, and I was really bummed because I wanted to go see the show. And so I drove down there, and I was like sitting in my car just trying to feel better. And finally, when the show started, I went in, and I don't know, I stayed for maybe an hour or so, and it was so loud, and I just didn't. It was pummeling, and I finally just went back out to my car, but I felt great. It's like Throbbing Gristle healed my flu. So.
Wow. Yeah, no, that show just seemed very epochal to me. And Michael, it was, an amazing person. He did all kinds of stuff around the LA scene in terms of putting on shows, putting out records, and Bruce, Michael, and I living together was absurd, but it did really work in terms of getting Bruce's printing press in this cool space, and it was fun. It was a blast. And so that show, I remember coming out of it and just thinking like that the actual experience of putting on an event could be sort of an artistic statement at the same time. And it was something about where he did it. It wasn't that, unusual, but it was the Culver City Veterans Auditorium, which just happened to be this really kind of bland, square, gray place that you would drive by. And then to have Throbbing Gristle there, it just transformed everything. And so that's, I think, something that bounced around in my head a lot. Is like, how can music and certain types of music that has these sort of sonic qualities, like what Savage Republic were doing too, how does it transform a space, and how does that create this sort of transcendent thing, which is like Bruce is describing, where you come out of there and it's healed your flu.
Well, shortly after you're deciding to have your first show in the Mojave Desert, that's such a brilliant idea. Did you have any other sources of inspiration?
No, I really was not aware of any, precursors of desert shows. I think I knew who the Flying Burrito Brothers were, but I didn't know who Graham Parsons was, or, that was like my older brother's music.
Sure.
But I had put on these smaller scale shows, in downtown warehouses and stuff. And then it was the experience of just driving through the desert and listening to the kind of music that I was really into then, and I still love now. But it was Wire 154. It was Savage Republic, Tragic Figures. It was PIL, and Chow Wobble and Holger Jukai and things like that, and just experiencing the desert with that music going. Because we took a pretty long road trip through Arizona into northern Mexico, which is all desert, and then came back, and somehow that was my biggest inspiration. And that's when I like Bruce said, that's when I came back to LA, and I called him. I'm like, do you want to do a show out in the desert? And, Bruce was the perfect person to receive that call, I think.
It's amazing because the whole aspect, from the transportation of the school buses to Bruce, you come up with the iconography of it and the ticket that you're not supposed to tear, and just all these visual and just mysterious elements. Because at this point, no one really knew what to expect, right? When they were going to show up at this location to then get on buses and go who knows where.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that something that maybe I didn't know at the time, but I think in talking to Bruce, one of his art professors was Chris Burden at UCLA, who's
amazing,
sort of known to have done some very extreme performance things. And just, I think that might have been like a subtle influence on the idea of like, let's not tell them where they're going, or, or how long the bus ride is going to be and things like that. I mean, I think all that stuff, just because we were young and like experimentally minded, may have happened anyway, but maybe Bruce can sort of talk about that as well.
Yeah. I think you're right, Stuart, that Chris Burden, the whole conceptual ideas behind an event or a project like this, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, taking Chris Burden's class just blew my mind. I mean, it just completely opened my idea of, well, what could art be? What can we do? And in Chris's class, we all had to kind of come up with various conceptual projects to do and present to the class. And there's one that is documented in the Savage Impressions book, which is that I conceived of taking the class on a guided tour of Torrance, California, which is basically a completely industrial location, like factories and big, I don't know, gas processing plants and things like that. And I ended up renting a U-Haul van that had no windows in it. And basically, everybody had to climb in the back of the van, and we drove them down to Torrance, and we stopped at like, okay, here's this factory, and you're going to look at this. And so in a way, that kind of goes back to the what we did with the buses and the desert performance, in that you're putting people here and they don't know where they're going.
Amazing.
And it was, it was really special. And I met the people that I first started doing music with when I first bought my guitar. I met in Chris Burden's class, Brent Wilcox and Tim Quinn, who had a group called Neath that they had started. And I ended up playing with them for about 6 months.
That's amazing. I mean, who could look at a school roster and basically be like, oh, Chris Burden's teaching a class now. Yeah, well, maybe that'll fit into my schedule. That
sounds interesting. I'll do that. I'll see what he's all about.
Where were you able to get these school buses? Like, that seems like a logistical nightmare in terms of getting the drivers and getting people on board. Because even when you take a break on your way out to the desert, they're not letting at these restaurants, they're locking the doors. They're not letting people in to use the restrooms, let alone having someone drive them. How did you get people to come on board?
Part of it was, kind of like when you asked about, was it the cops or what was the motivation? I mean, part of the school bus thing was very practical, because I really didn't see this where a bunch of people were going to drive themselves out to this dry lake bed that Bruce had brought me to. So I thought, well, maybe if we just include the transportation. And it's like, well, what's the cheapest mode that, some kids that really don't have a lot of any funding or anything. I mean, so I thought of school buses, and then I just went around to a bunch of different companies that you would lease the buses from. And then somebody said yes. I mean, it was kind of like, okay, we'll do that. And we did it all. The first one was all in the daytime, or that was the idea anyway. Right. That we were going to leave in the morning and get out to the desert while it was still daylight, come back. But looking back on it, like, it would have been so easy for them to just say, no, you don't have insurance, or no, we're not going to drive out on a dry lake with a school bus. I mean,
this 3 mile dirt road.
They just rolled with it, which, and
yeah.
And as far as when we stopped at that truck stop, that was probably as dangerous as any situation of all the Desolation Center stuff, just because like rednecks back then really did not appreciate punk rock people with funny haircuts and dyed hair, and it was getting potentially violent before we ever got there.
Oh my gosh. Hey, Bruce, how many tickets did you end up making and printing for the first Desolation Center show?
What was it, Stuart? I think you had maybe 150 people or so.
Yeah.
So I probably, printed 200 or thereabouts. I mean, I think we knew that we were going to limit it to 3 bus loads, and we knew how many people would fit on the buses. So I think it was limited to 150 or so people.
Your work just stood out in record stores. When you'd see a Savage Republic record or stuff from your label, it just, I didn't know it was the same person that was doing the Camper Van Beethoven artwork on the first couple records to this.
Yeah.
But it made sense later putting all the pieces together. But again, one of the great things about the film is, like you mentioned, all the photography that's in it. There's that great sequence of seeing the Savage Republic flag just in the desert. It's so iconic and powerful. And even if it wasn't like necessarily the Desolation Center flag, it definitely has an energy and a power to it. Could you speak a little bit more on the Savage Republic iconography?
Yeah, I mean, when we first started the band, we weren't called Savage Republic. We chose the name Africa Corps because there was a lot of the percussion, the metal percussion, and other types of percussion, and it just felt like, okay, there's the right name. We didn't spell it with K's because we didn't really want that connection with the whole Rommel thing. Although people started giving us that, and that was one of the reasons that we ended up changing the name before the album came out. We decided we needed a new name. So, but once we chose the name Savage Republic, I thought, oh, well, we need a flag, we need stamps, we need, it's just like, there's the influence of Chris Burden. It's like, bring in we have this interesting name. What kind of concept can we build around that? And so, I got a piece of canvas and painted a flag for Savage Republic. And I went out to the location the day before, and I camped out overnight. And I basically just sort of established the place where the buses were going to come, and I planted the flag out there. And so that was kind of like, okay, that's how the buses knew where to go. Look for the flag.
Amazing.
And of course, this is before the days of cell phones. And so I was out there for most of the day, just kind of like going, well, gee, I wonder when people are going to start showing up, and wondering, is this really going to happen? And
right.
Then finally, early afternoon, I started seeing a few cars driving in, and then the buses showed up, and it was like, all right, let's do it.
Stuart, can you talk about why you chose Minutemen to be one of the first, along with Savage Republic's people to do it? Because they still remain one of my favorite bands.
I feel like, in a way, similar to the way, Bruce and Savage Republic were approaching what they were doing, but the Minutemen had a completely different aesthetic. They were very high energy. They had kind of like a very compact, but experimental approach, and the lyrics were just amazing. And
yes.
So I loved seeing, and they were a great live band. They were like, just every time you'd see them, they had so many songs, and so it was always worth going. It wasn't just like, oh, we're going to do our set,
Right.
And so I'd already done some of these smaller type gigs with the Minutemen, and I knew, in particular, D. Boon was a friend, and so it just made sense to me to have 2 amazing bands in this amazing location, rather than like, oh, who's the opening act,
Right.
And so so once Bruce had kind of like laid out the scenario with the location and the Savage Republic would do this, I hit up the Minutemen, and they were kind of up for playing anywhere. You know what I mean? And so that
Mike Watt's still that way.
totally, yeah.
In the film, I really loved it because Boon has kind of a cool look. He's wearing sunglasses and, a bandana and this psychedelic shirt. And then quickly you realize, oh, he's doing this out of necessity. The sand is pummeling them. They pull the school bus behind them to kind of create a barrier. Bruce, what was it like playing in the desert?
Oh, I really wanted to do that. For a long time. And it was interesting because when Stuart first called me and asked if, would Savage Republic be interested in doing a show in the desert, I'd actually been thinking about how would we set something like that up? And it was just like perfect timing. And I had found this location. I don't remember exactly when, but I had taken some film classes at UCLA, and I wanted to create a film for some sort of strange, amalgamation of Eraserhead and Lawrence of Arabia was my idea in my head. And I never got around to doing that, but I thought, I'd like to have Savage Republic do soundtrack music for that. But I had found this dry lake bed, and I went out there with one of the original members of Savage Republic, and actually that was where we got the photograph of the Savage Republic flag that I had made that we used on the film noir 7-inch. That was me holding the flag up in the air and blowing in the wind. My other compatriot took the photograph. But the wind was a problem. I just really liked the idea of people being able to see us play and having this beautiful landscape behind us. And when the wind picked up and we had to put the buses behind us, it was kind of like, okay, I could look out and see this beautiful landscape with people dancing across the dry lake bed while we were playing. And that was really great. But I always wanted there to be photographs of Savage Republic playing with the landscape behind us, and we couldn't get that. So.
And what did it sound like? Could you hear it bouncing back, or did it evaporate? What was the sound like?
Well, it kind of evaporated a bit. So, but
I think it carried as well, because you can see people were dancing. I don't think they were, they could still hear the music pretty long way away from where, the amps were. And
there were people out there a quarter mile away just dancing across the dry lake bed. So it was really cool to see that.
That's amazing.
And of course, Victor was there too. I mean, he and I had been corresponding a little bit, and he came up and introduced himself at that show. So, and he took a couple of really great photographs that we have that we've used for various things.
So, Stuart, were you able to enjoy the show, or were you working the show? What was your feeling?
I really did enjoy it. And I remember in particular that first show, like once everything was like going, and the last thing was dealing with this whole wind factor, which did stress me out. But then we kind of came up with the sound guy, Ed Serino, this idea of creating basically like a triangle of 3 buses that would be like the backdrop, which actually looks cool in photos. It's not what maybe we had intended.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
But that was kind of like the windbreak. And so once I was like, okay, this is still really windy, but like at least people can hear the bands, and I just was totally caught up in the moment, and I don't even, I remember like just, there was maybe a little bit of, skanking around and mosh pit and whatever. It just super fun. I just gave in to just being, part of the audience. And I think part of the idea was also that the audience and the musicians, were kind of all in it together. By the time you've taken this bus ride out there and you're in this super remote scenic location that, looks like some other planet or whatever.
Yeah, there wasn't a stage. We were all just standing on the dry lake bed, and the audience was just standing or sitting on the dirt, out there. That was, yeah.
Were you in the back of your mind thinking, I want to do something like this again? Was there something brewing in you, or were you ready to be like, that was enough?
I think it was definitely a change of heart. It was like, at the time I thought, wow, how am I going to top this show? This was so amazing. Maybe I'll do something else. So I kind of like quit my job and decided, back then they had courier flights where you could get to London for free. So I was just like, I'm just going to go. And I met Genesis Pjorge on that trip and ended up in Berlin. And then seeing Einsturzende Neubauten, everything kind of like changed for me. And I got to know some of the members. I just was like, wow, you guys would be amazing in the desert. Never expecting them to kind of take me up on it. Because even just them touring the US seemed very kind of hypothetical at that point.
Yeah. And they basically, when they got there, they gave you 2 weeks notice.
Yeah.
They're basically like, we're going to be there. Was that a different kind of pressure than
Yes.
the first show?
Absolutely. I mean, it was really exciting to get a call from one of them. And, I think they were probably already in New York by that time, but kind of like working their way across the country. And so there wasn't a lot of time. I mean, I don't remember how long Bruce and I really planned out the first desert show, but it all seemed a lot more relaxed and not such a compressed situation. And I also felt a little bit more pressure because they were like a European band on tour, and there was all kinds of different parameters. Like, we need to get construction equipment, to and then it was like, oh, okay, oh yeah, you're going to need to get a van, and like we're going to drive around construction sites wearing jumpsuits, and then we're just going to basically appropriate long metal tubes and things that we're going to play the next day. I'm like, okay, that sounds fun, guys. So and then so some of it was like renting road leveling stuff. Some of it was just like taking whatever they needed, and so that was kind of interesting for me. It was just a whole different experience. Yeah.
And then getting Survival Research Laboratories involved. Had either of you worked with them before this event?
No, I was just aware of them because there were research publications. Vail published these books, and one was called the Industrial Culture Handbook.
Yes, that was essential.
They had Throbbing Gristle, they had Survival Research Laboratories, they had Monty Kazaza, they had SBK, all these people that I totally was like into at the time, and I felt like was kind of a continuum with people like Bruce and Einsturzende Neubauten too. And so I knew who they were, and I was just fascinated by these images of these sort of machines with animal parts and out on the street in San Francisco, and just the whole thing. So one of the people in Einsturzende Neubauten also was like, well, what do you think about having Survival Research Laboratories there? And so I was just like, wow, this is just getting so cool. Like, yeah, and so then I talked to Mark Pauline, and he was really just well, can you give us gas money, because we'll come down there.
Yeah, it seems like they're still figuring it out. They're like overloading their car with too much gear, and they're like, oh, you have to leave the tank on the side of the road, we can't make it. And I mean, I had a chance to see Survival Research Laboratories a couple times. I always chickened out because I'd read those books you're talking about, I'd seen the footage, and I just was like, I know I'm going to be the one that's going to die at one of these things. I just know it. I've just got the soul for it. But my brother went, he had the courage. He went with his friends, and he did say he said it was really scary and very threatening and there's no boundaries. The things are charging at people. With the distance of the desert, though, and having, a larger landscape to do this thing, did you have any worries with, like Pauline wanting to bring explosives in? Or was it just, we're in the moment, this is what's going on, this is part of the art movement, we're not really worried about that?
From my point of view, I wasn't really questioning a lot about what Survival Research Laboratories was going to do. In fact, I thought they were going to bring some of those machines that they created down, and just have them kind of interact around. You know what I mean? Like sort of like what you would later maybe have seen in the early days of Burning Man. But there was all kinds of reasons why they couldn't do that. And there was no budget, so I think what they kind of improvised as they went along, and at some point they realized that they could just get all this debris, a lot of old refrigerators and stuff that was just left out in the desert. They had brought this black powder to blow it up with, and so that became the performance. But probably if he had told me at the beginning like that's what they were going to do, I might have been a little more concerned. But it just sort of evolved into something where I came out there with the Neubauten situation, and then I'm like, okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah, there's some different things going on. The first show was daytime, correct?
Yeah. It was actually further. The drive was even further
okay.
than where we had gone the first time. But part of it was, Bruce and I both went out to scout a location, and we wanted it to be different than the dry lake bed with the wind blowing and all that where we had done the first one. And so Bruce, I think, once again had looked at the map and said, there's a town called Mecca, and it's out in the desert. And that kind of fit in with the whole aesthetic of, the Middle Eastern things. And that was part of Savage Republic's aesthetic. And so we just drove out there, and then there's a beautiful canyon, which I now know is called Box Canyon. And so it just seemed like, yeah, let's have a different type of landscape. But part of it was really possibly as risky as anything else that we did, because we picked a road that was closed for Caltrans construction. But we thought, well, no one will be driving by, which wasn't completely true. But I think some of this was just being young and not really knowing how many different things can go wrong. But anyway, we did decide that this closed road with this beautiful canyon was the perfect spot. So it felt different in a way than the previous show.
You also had performers as people were entering in, correct?
That was something that I pulled together called Gemma El Fana, which was a performance, and it was conceived as a performance about the place. And so I had several of the other members from Savage Republic and a couple of other musician friends of mine, and we all went out there the day before and camped out, and we just figured it was going to be mostly percussion, and then I had the conch shell that I was blowing through to sort of start the whole thing. So we all climbed up on the rocks and did this performance as people were coming in. And again, there actually was some wind there. It's like the day before when we were rehearsing it and kind of planning things out, it was completely quiet, and everything was echoing really nicely off of the various canyon walls. And then, of course, when we went to go do it, there was a breeze that came up. And so people said they could hear it really well, but I remember at the time thinking, oh man, wind again.
It's amazing in the film. All this is documented. I don't know who was shooting that footage at that point or recording the sound, but all the things you're talking about, whether it's survival research, blowing up the refrigerators and ovens, which also really bummed me out. I'd never thought about like, oh yeah, this beautiful place, people are just dumping shit out there and driving away. I thought it was kind of a powerful thing for them to be like, yeah, we found this shit out here and we're going to blow it up. was something I never thought about when I had been reading about this event. Bruce, after you perform, you get to be a spectator more this time.
Yeah.
What was your memories of Neubauten playing?
It was pretty intense. I mean, I didn't actually get a front row seat for that. I was more like, you know what? I'm just going to walk down the road and just sort of experience everything from a distance. And that just, to me, personally, I think I was a bit disappointed in my own performance. It didn't do what I was feeling it was going to do.
Okay.
And I just wanted to just kind of go be by myself for a while. And so I walked down the road, and I just, as things kind of happened up at the canyon, you could see lights and fires and noise, and it was interesting experience, definitely.
Did you have trouble with the generators ever, or, in terms of getting power sources for all this? Because I can imagine all this industrial machinery and amplifications, microphones, lighting, it being kind of a logistical nightmare.
Well, we definitely got a lot more generators and a lot more powerful ones for the second show. And we probably were a little underpowered for the first desert show, because everything we were just sort of learning as we went along, in a sense. But I mean, it certainly did. Bruce, I don't think it hurt the performance, the amount of power we had, but it was about it was taxing that one generator pretty heavily. So yeah, I think the next time we came back with like 4 and bigger ones, and so it was sufficient for what Neubauten were doing, because a lot of it was somewhat organically, I mean, they put contact mics on all the metal, but I think some of the things were just like a road leveling piece of equipment was also the percussion. So that balance was kind of I don't know, amazing to me.
Well, I have 2 special guests for you that were in your film and were interviewed about Neubauten. I would like to introduce Mel Compton. He came to age in the original Los Angeles punk explosion and went on the road, managed such bands as 3 O'Clock, Red Kross, Young Fresh Fellows, and as well as managed the Zeros, Bee People, Thin White Rope, Poster Children, Congo Norvell, and more. With his husband, Skip King, they founded and were co-owners of Pterodactyl Records, which released the Shadow Minstrels EP, as well as some very limited Neubauten content and collectibles. Hi, guys. How's it going?
Oh, there they are.
Hey.
Hey, guys.
Hi.
Good to see you.
I've seen the film several times, Stuart, and one of the most powerful parts in it is Skip and Mel talking about their experience at the Neubauten show. And I thought it'd be interesting to get, their perspective in terms of somebody who went on the bus, got there, the surprise of it all, as well as, the letter that you wrote to your parents, Skip, about how this event changed you.
Very cool surprise, Chris. So excited to see these guys. Yeah.
Did you go to the first Desolation Center event?
Not to the first one, no. I don't know why we didn't go. I was aware of it. I don't remember why. I remember why I didn't go to the Minutemen one, because I was terrified of water and I didn't want to go out on a boat.
The Pedro one that came later.
Yes.
So you heard that Neubauten was coming and there was a special event for it. Where did you hear about it? Like, what was your source of finding out about this secret show?
Well, actually, we found out about Neubauten through Lydia Lunch. She actually suggested that we listen to their records because she had heard them before. So we started buying up the few records that were out there and loved them and were like amazed. So we were keeping an eye out, and first the Perkins Palace show popped up, and then I think, or maybe Stewart's did. I'm not sure which was which, but we wanted to go to both. So we went to the Perkins show, and then the next day was the Desolation Center show in the desert.
And where did you buy a ticket to the Desolation Center show? Where did you get access to this?
I can't recall.
I don't remember either.
Bruce, Stuart, how did people get tickets to something like this?
Well, basically there was independent record stores, and that was I think the only place that I sold tickets. Originally, actually, there was Bruce's Independent Project Records mailing list, which we used for the first desert show, and that's where we sold our first tickets. But then we kind of, and again, this person that we talked about earlier who did the Throbbing Gristle show, Michael Shepard, kind of showed me the ropes. He's like, well, you go to Aaron's Records, you go to Rhino,
Okay.
and they would sell tickets. Really, they didn't ask me, like, do you have enough money to bring Einsturzende Neubauten here? It was just more like, okay, and I mean, but I obviously felt honor bound to make it happen.
That's probably where I found out about the tickets at the show, was because I was working at Vinyl Fetish on Melrose Avenue at the time, and I'm sure we were selling tickets there. That's probably where I found out about it.
And additionally, we always did the circuit of going to errands and all these other places, regularly looking for vinyl, and that may have been how we came across it as well.
Yeah, there were probably flyers that were put up at record stores and things like that. So.
And then what was the experience of like getting on a bus going to the middle of nowhere? Like, was that exciting? Did it get boring at a certain point? What was the energy on that thing like?
Well, no, it was very exciting. It was because we didn't know what was going on. We hadn't gotten to the first one, so we didn't expect anything at all. We didn't know what was happening.
Uh-huh.
And it just, I mean, it was exciting trying to get to it would seem like a really long drive because we went way out there, but it was so exciting just thinking about it and what was going to happen. Plus, I gotta say, just about everybody on the bus was on some sort of psychedelic drug, so that helped matters a lot too.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, Stuart, were you ever afraid of people not getting back on the bus at the end of an event?
I mean, I should have been, but it didn't occur to me that someone would, not get back on the bus. Or also, I think I had a bit of an attitude like, well, if they don't, then I guess they, should bring some water and like take care of themselves. It wasn't like we were going to be everybody's babysitter. We did provide transportation. But the other side of it was, I mean, my recollection is that by the time you've been on this bus for several hours, even people that you didn't know at all, it's a completely different sensibility than showing up at a gig and everybody kind of like looking at each other, especially back then. There were all kinds of attitudes being thrown, but this was more like kind of like a sense of community that got created.
Yes.
Yeah.
How many people were at this show?
I'm going to say like maybe several hundred. Very big answer. I think it was like six buses, and the first one was 3. And so
3. Yeah. 3.
So about twice as many. So 300 or 400 people.
Mel and Skip, did you see the door blow off the cave and fly over everyone's head and almost decapitate someone? Were you there for that? When
Yes.
Survival Research?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that, please?
I don't remember much about it. I was a little pissed off because he was blowing up the desert. I thought that was a really bad thing.
Uh-huh.
And but I don't really remember. I remember everybody being kind of panicky for a few seconds or a few minutes but I don't remember much about it at this point in time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just felt like that's what shows were like. You go see the Butthole Surfers and you're like, I'm going to die in this or we're going to live. And, it just took it for granted.
That's how the whole thing felt. I mean, you weren't sure if you were going to come out of there alive, and it didn't really matter because we were having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, there was all that thing like the pickup truck with a bunch of redneck guys, showing up, and everybody was like, "Well, they're going to start shooting everyone." And instead, they just looked at us in panic and ran away. So it was all
part of the. And Stuart, you didn't plan that, right? That wasn't part of.
No, that wasn't part of the performance. No, in fact, that's such a good story that it should have been in the film, but I don't think I didn't capture that until I heard about it afterward, even after doing the interviews with Mel and Skip and stuff. Because there was things, it was hard to know everything that was going on.
Right. And especially most of it was taking place at night, which was quite different. And, one of the most powerful parts of the film is, Skip, you talking about how this event changed you and the letter you wrote to your parents about it. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I had been estranged from my parents. I basically ran away from home in 78, and they were just extreme alcoholics, very hard to live with, very abusive, not physically, but mentally. And so I hadn't talked to them in a number of years, even at the insistence of my only sibling. But when this happened, I knew that there were questions as to why I was doing what I was doing, because I got into the scene live later, but I was hooked into the punk scene like from 76 or whenever records started coming out. But um, I was so changed already by a trip to London in 80 with me proposing to Mel. And then fast forward those years to this. This was pretty much the second life changing thing because it was so extraordinary to do something so different with bands that are completely different from the norm and have such a wonderful experience out of it overall. And it's one of the most wonderful experiences I ever went on. And so I just felt compelled to let my parents know what was happening in my life, why I was the person I was now. And because I really significantly changed from childhood to this and in 84. So I felt compelled to give them a very long thing. So I didn't know how they reacted. And then my dad later, after my mom died, came to me with some of her effects and said, and she left this basically for you because she was very, very touched by the content. She never talked to me about it after I sent it to her, but she talked to him and told him to give it back to me. That's why I have it now.
No, it's amazing. I mean, I think, music is, it's time travel and it's, a shield and it's identity and it's a chip on your shoulder and all these things throughout life. And I just thought it was really powerful to have those events that you go to that you're like, I'm not the same person I was.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Stuart, one of the things I loved in the film is you've done two of these, like about 14 months apart. And you say, at this point, I feel like I'm repeating myself. And I'm like, that is amazing. That is such a thing of the era.
Yeah.
No one anymore, they'd be like, how do we monetize it? How often can we do this? How can we make it bigger? What do we brand it? Where's our advertising? I just remember that so well. People being like, we've done that. What are we going to do next? And I love where you went next. You went to basically San Pedro. You went to the water.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, anyway, that was my train of thought, which was, completely different, but I don't think there was a lot of monetizing back then either. I mean, with our community, there just wasn't a lot of money to be made at that. I mean, maybe the Go-Go's did or something, but so for me, it was all the challenge of like, okay, if you're going to be this out of the box event person, then you got to do something different again. And because I was such a huge Minutemen fan, I would go see them in somebody's backyard. But I was always driving down to San Pedro on the Harbor Freeway, as we called it then, the 110. So the visuals, like what Bruce was talking about, taking that UCLA class to an industrial area, like this was mega industrial. And at night, it just had this very sort of otherworldly quality. Also, the Minutemen, a big part of their identity was being these guys from San Pedro and, growing up in this blue collar part of LA that was, really completely in contrast to the cliches of Hollywood and the beach and whatever, So I just really liked the idea of having the Minutemen be in their element. And
yeah,
to make it really cool, they couldn't just be playing at the harbor. They had to be on a boat going around the harbor. And, people are like, oh, did you know the Sex Pistols played on a boat? I'm like, yeah, I probably remember that, but that wasn't like the biggest thing in my life either, So it was really just trying to think of the ultimate Minutemen show. But the first point of it was just desert. Well, let's change the element here. Now let's do water, so.
It's incredible you could do that because nowadays you can.
Yeah.
But how did you, again, navigate something like letting a bunch of people on a boat, setting up a PA, probably having them hear the Meat Puppet sound check or whatever, and having them not stop it?
Right. I mean, part of it was knocking on a lot of doors. I remember going with friends of mine to like different charter boats and things like that. And they'd just be like, nope. But then, this one whale watch boat, the Cormorant was like, sure, we do parties, kind of thing. And then we had the sound guy, Ed Serino, who was he had actually worked with the Minutemen a bunch of times. That's how I found him. But, he had done 2 desert shows, and he was just up for whatever. I think he enjoyed the challenge of it too. So, he had to figure out some of the logistics. Some of the people that were in the band Psycom, like Aaron, figured out how to build, a deck that we could put the bands on and lash the speakers to, and that was all being done while the boat was moving from King Harbor.
I know there's the footage of the PA going, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, and it's like, I stop for a second, everyone slow down. We got to do this.
That was another one where I'm like, had I really thought this through, the speakers could have gone overboard, or any one of the drunken pogoing people could have easily gone overboard too. But we got lucky, and none of that stuff actually happened.
And on this one, did people know where the event was going to be? They're like, it's at the harbor.
Yeah.
Go there.
I think once you had the ticket, you knew where the dock was, and it was right near what's called the Maritime Museum down there now. But I don't think we gave a lot of details about where the boat was going to go. We just said
right,
it's going to be going around the harbor, and we kept it within the harbor. We didn't go outside the breakwater because at that point we would have lost the speakers.
And Bruce, when you're designing stuff for all these different events, what were you thinking about when you were doing something like for San Pedro?
So because it had the water theme, of course, we designed tickets that were printed blue and silver. It just seemed like, okay, let's change it from this earthy sand colors to something cool. And I'm pretty sure that Stuart and I worked together on figuring that out. I'm trying to remember, Stuart, were you still at the Nate Starkman building then when we were?
Well, that would have been, I remember it was June 15th, 1984 was the date of that one.
That would have been the first year that we were in the Nate Starkman building. So you were around. We probably came down to the print shop and watched the typesetting.
There was definitely an anchor involved too. Which the Minutemen had sort of decided to make the anchor logo the way Bruce had done, his Savage Republic flag, and so that was kind of an iconic.
Yeah, you gave me some elements to work with, and I had photo engraved printing plates made. And
how long does it take to do something like that with the process you were using?
So a ticket like that, a small one, that was 2-color printing. So you print one color one day and let it dry overnight, and then print the second color the next day. Maybe it takes a day or so to get printing plates back, and probably a couple of hours of typesetting, handset type, single letters, pulling them out of the drawer and setting them up. So, could probably do the whole thing within 3 or 4 days if you were just focused on it.
Right. That's amazing. They're beautiful and quite collectible. Too,
They were fun. When Stuart was working on the film, and we conceived of the idea of making replicas of the tickets, and so I was able to. It was fun to pull elements out of the drawers, that had been in there for 40 years or whatever, and just I had to kind of redesign things a little bit because there were a couple of typefaces that I didn't have still, so I had to find something similar. I used some of the original printing plates that I still have.
And Stuart, what did you think of the show? Like, were you happy with it? Did it have the same power as the other ones? Did it feel like more of a traditional show on a boat? What were you feeling?
I thought it was a great show. I really, again, didn't think of like, oh, there's an opening act. It was like, I was really into what the Meat Puppets were doing at that point in time.
Absolutely.
And so that was like, wow, 2 great bands, happen to be both SST, but I think that this whole idea of music in places where it's not supposed to be, having this sort of transcendent feeling, I had that feeling again where and I remember a moment very distinctly when the boat went under this bridge that goes between Terminal Island and San Pedro, Vincent Thomas Bridge, and it was just like, and you could hear the sound echoing, beneath, and then the meat puppets were playing, and it was just like, wow, this is kind of what I wanted it to be, So I felt like a sense of like, yeah, this is another great event, and I don't need to do another boat show.
Yeah, there's really beautiful footage of going underneath all the giant cranes and just kind of the weird stillness of it. It did feel like another planet, just looking at the music, hearing the meat puppets playing and looking at that. Again, the film is full of incredible archival photography and footage.
Yeah, when I saw the film first time and I saw that footage, I was kicking myself. It was like almost architectural. It was strange.
Yeah.
It was. I absolutely loved the way it looked, and I was like, and he's gotten finally over his fear of floating because he had to go on ferries with bands later. So, but in those early 80s, he was still afraid to get on ships.
I get it. And then I first heard about what you were doing, the Sonic Youth show, reading about that, having the VHS tape of it. Where did you end up doing the location for that?
We actually went back to the same location, which is called Soggy Dry Lake, where we had done the first Mojave Exodus show that Bruce had brought me to.
Okay.
But we used another part of it. So instead of the flat kind of area where the wind was blowing and which was beautiful, but we picked sort of more like a rock cliff kind of formation and had everything set up behind that, with that behind it. Yeah.
It's such an amazing lineup. Sonic Youth, Meat Puppets, Red Cross, Psycom, correct?
Yes.
Which was Perry Farrell's early band.
Yeah. And my friend Mariska, who's really one of the people that was pretty instrumental in us being able to pull these events off. And she also was co-producer of the film. So that was her band, along with Aaron, who I mentioned, and someone named Rich Evac. And then by the time Psycom played that show, I was roommates with him at the later to be notorious location, the Wilton House.
There's so much great footage from this concert. It's so funny. Somebody will be like, there was this guy yelling, "I'm in the desert," over and over again. And then you hear the guy, "I'm in the desert. I'm in the desert." And then you get to see Red Cross lost on their way. They can't find it. And they're meeting other cars and they're doing the convoy. So they're telling you this stuff and you're watching it. That must have been so thrilling for you when you're putting this movie together to be like, oh my God, they caught this stuff that I didn't know people had.
Yeah, I mean, and every filmmaker that contributed to it, I would just be amazed. Like Gus Hudson from Flipside was really the person who that I've been in touch with that was doing the videotaping out there, and then David Travis also. When they're like, "Yeah, we're in the desert, guy," I'm like, oh my God. Because I remember trying to get the microphone away from him so we could go on to the next set. Now, this is something that just come up recently. Turns out he works at the Museum of Tolerance. He's a reformed skinhead who actually went to prison for many years for attacking a family of color out in the Inland Empire. And I didn't realize at that time who I was grabbing the microphone from. He was a big guy. He was a friend of the Savage Republic drummer, actually.
Mark Erskine, yeah, I remember it.
So he was actually at the first Desert show too. But anyway, there's definitely chaotic elements that happened in the events, especially the desert ones. And then they become sort of legendary. And remember that we're in the desert, guy.
Mel and Skip, do you remember the Meat Puppets saying "turn the lights out" and then it just going dark while they were playing?
I remember it going dark. I don't remember them saying "turn the lights out." I thought it was power outage.
Uh-huh. But it was astounding. you see stars above you, and it's just this, this soundtrack. It was incredible, absolutely incredible. And this trip, we had friends from Pasadena that we knew, and others from that music. There's a little musical section I call Pasadena Contingent. They were all out there with us as well on that trip, and they were having a blast. They thought it was just the whole thing was just the best, one of the best things I've ever done.
They're kind of at the height of their powers, and to just hear that like Up on the Sun, Meat Puppets 2 era stuff in the dark, oh my God, I'd give anything to have been there for that. That's just incredible.
As the promoter guy, I was like, why is Chris Kirkwood turning out the lights? But then it was like, or, why is Kurt saying to do this? And then looking back on it, it was so right. It was a full moon. We had planned it around the full moon. That was part of what the timing of it was. And so it just created this completely, like, as people have said, otherworldly environment. But at the time I was like, don't turn the lights out. But anyway.
And this was Sonic Youth. This is their first California show.
First West Coast appearance. Yeah. Okay. And that was, I thought, a bold move on their part, but also like, we kind of gave them a great lineup to be part of, with Red Kross and the Meat Puppets. And, I think it really took them out of the New York kind of urban sensibility, and it kind of allowed some of the other aspects of their music to be, showcased.
Yeah. Bruce, were you following Sonic Youth at this point?
Well, I was aware of them. I definitely, heard some of their music and knew that there was a connection with Glenn Branca that, was an inspiration for me when I was starting Savage Republic. I also knew, had gotten to know some of the people, the Pasadena people that Skip and Mel were talking about, the Bee People, that Tom Rashawn, the original drummer of the Bee People, had said that he moved to New York and he played drums with them for a while when they were first starting out. And so, and I believe that show that I saw of Glenn Branca at CalArts in Valencia, which would have been early 1981, I'm pretty sure that Lee Ronaldo was part of his band at that time. I don't know exactly, but yeah, I mean, I was aware of them. I'd heard, early recordings of theirs, and I just thought it was really cool that Stuart was going to do a show with them.
It's such great footage of them. Just what a great era. I mean, again, the lineup gives me chills, because then on top of it, you got Red Kross. I mean, I just loved bills like this. And bills like this, I feel like were more common in the 80s, where it was like, yeah, we're just going to have like a psychedelic band with like some glam stompers with like a bunch of hardcore stuff here. And then someone's going to do some performance art with, toasters and blenders. And you're like, great, that's a night. That's it. Yeah, totally. And that was just one night of your week.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big deal for Sonic Youth to have Red Kross on that show. I mean, I was definitely like, I had something to prove about getting the Meat Puppets out to the desert, because as much as I'd love seeing them on the boat, I felt like that wasn't the ultimate, especially with the direction that their music was going and them being from Arizona. But
right,
Sonic Youth were just way into Red Kross, which is, looking back on it, any of this stuff is not really obvious, but I think that they were just, and particularly I think Thurston just really like studying all this West Coast music that was going on,
Right.
And
did LA always embrace Red Kross, or was there like kind of a push against it when they first started?
I feel like it was all part of this sort of South Bay continuum of stuff. I mean, they were part of that original scene of when Black Flag started out and things like that. I don't know that there was a push back, but I mean, it was still controversial that they had long hair back then.
Right.
Who cares now? But, like.
Yeah, they like Kiss. It was like people were freaking out. I remember my friends being like, they do Kiss covers. Yeah. I'm like, that's great.
They do a mean version of Deuce. Sure. Yeah.
And so how late did they show up?
It was more just, again, like Bruce was saying about no cell phones. We had no idea where they were, why they weren't there. I think a friend of ours Carmel Moran, Conlon now, was managing them at the time. And somehow they had decided to book themselves the night before in San Francisco, flew into the Burbank airport, and then, I just don't think anybody realized how hard it was going to be to find this location at night,
Oh, it's so great.
with someone who'd never been there before. And so, but yeah, I remember thinking like, oh, this is all going to be fine. But I think other people were like, why is Red Cross hiding in the desert? Did they just want a headline? Like, what's going on?
Of course. Well, you watch the film and it's obviously not the case. They are really lost.
No.
And my favorite, one of my favorite quotes in the film, they get there and this woman comes up to the mic and she says, "Can the girl who brought Red Cross here come up here? Caroline or whatever, you got lost with us. My acid is in your car and it's an emergency."
Yes.
And I was like,
that was their manager actually at the time.
it's an emergency. I was like, I get it. I've been to these shows. So Mel and Skip, what was that night like for you?
It was different. The Einsturzende night was more tribal. This one wasn't like that. It was really one of my favorite memories of it. As I think it was during the meat puppets, and the lights went out, and so I just walked way out in the desert, just way far away. And I think Fred Nielsen was with me, and I know Skip was.
Yeah.
And we just walked way out in the desert, and you couldn't see anything, but you could hear the meat puppets, and it was fantastic and magical and beautiful, and just it was just almost perfect.
And then after this show, you get a letter from the United States Interior Bureau of Land Management. That must have been kind of scary to get something like that, so official. Like you're like, oh, I'm on the radar.
Yeah, it really got to me, I think, because it was like the federal government, and we were trespassing on federal land, and they wanted some huge, to me, what was a huge sum of money, which eventually got negotiated down to something that was manageable by a benefit at the Anti Club. But I think up until then it had been a completely guerrilla thing, and nobody in authority even knew we were doing it. And looking back on it, that kind of mind blowing. That we could just go out there and do these things, come back, and there was no repercussions. And so I think part of it was, I think that they had the most people. Now we're up to like almost 500 people, which is still small scale. I also let people, if they wanted to, just drive themselves, which I think made it just more visible, maybe, of what was going on. But I've heard all these, I don't know, crazy rumors, which I have not been able to verify, that supposedly there was, helicopters overhead, filming everything, and that's how the Bureau of Land Management knew about it. But
wow,
it could also have been that there was a bunch of big pile of beer bottles out there, and they're like, what just happened? Because apparently there's only like 5 sort of officers for the entire California desert, and so they couldn't police everything. But I think just somebody decided to piece it together. They looked at the LA Weekly, somehow they got the flyer, they mailed me an official letter, and it could have been a serious crime had they wanted to really prosecute me.
And so through the benefit with like the NIP drivers, Minutemen, Lawndale, you were able to raise enough to pay the fee?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, basically that was kind of the way things were in that era, was like, if somebody's got a problem, bands would get together and do a benefit and, help them out. And so it was the trespass benefit. And a little known fact, but Hope Sandoval actually was the opening act with her Before Magic Star group called Coming Home or Going Home. I don't remember. But she was friends of mine, and they were completely acoustic, like 2 teenage girls from East LA. And opening for the Nip Drivers, I guess, just scared the crap out of her. But people loved them, and it was great. So.
I loved getting to, like I said, I was too scared to see Survival Research because that involved real threat. But I did love going to dangerous music shows and things that took me, like made me uncomfortable or pushed back at the audience. So I think it makes everyone stronger. But as the shows are getting bigger, are you starting to feel like a shift in the music scene? Is things changing? Because things are getting obviously diverse in a really cool way musically, but is it also getting a little bit more professional? Or are people starting to have different demands?
I felt like that. I mean, for me, as someone who, wasn't really, I mean, I've never been a musician. So I was sort of just part of this scene that I always felt like also included photographers and graphic artists and people like me that were putting on events. And it just started to feel like it was becoming more codified about like the rock world. You know what I mean? And I hate to say it, but even, I love the Red Hot Chili Peppers when they started out, but they would be an example of like, wow, this isn't like the Minutemen anymore. This is like, it's all of a sudden it's becoming MTV or whatever. And
Right.
sure enough, you see them at the Super Bowl however many years later. And so I started to feel like the people that were doing the scene were, kind of working to create something that a record company person, A&R guy, could come in and market, and so that became less interesting to me.
How about for you, Bruce, as a musician? Did you feel that?
It's interesting because we always wanted more people to hear our music, and there were a number of times when we tried to get the attention of people at larger labels, and they weren't interested. So we just continued to do what we did and create the music that we wanted to make. We never really tried to fit in necessarily.
Right. Well, in the 80s, there still wasn't much of a dream to be had. There was a ceiling, definitely, for the type of music people were creating. And it seemed like getting 500 people to a show in the desert was like, that's a success. You know what I mean? That's huge.
Right.
I'd go see a show, and if there was like 70 people there, I'd be like, they're famous. Like they're popular.
Yeah.
Was the show with the Swans your last show that you did?
That was my last Desolation Center event. And that was something where there was an opportunity. A friend of mine was on the board of this art foundation, and they got a grant from the NEA. And he's just like somebody named Nick Green, who was in the Blue Daisies. I don't know if you remember them. But anyway, he was like, yeah, we got this funding, and you want to do a show? And we were kind of kicking around ideas, and Swans just seemed like really monumental and like powerful, and all of a sudden we had Rat Sound, who had been doing Black Flags PA stuff, and now I think they do Coachella. But anyway, so we had an incredible sound system, and it was, and Saccharin Trust played, Brad Lehner's group at the time, Dead of Nature, played as well. It was kind of like a scaled up version of what I had done with sort of downtown LA warehouse type spaces, as opposed to being really completely out in the middle of nowhere. But it was a cool event, and again, it was like nobody else was going to bring Swans out, and Sonic Youth had played a great set, and but there was a lot of fun things going on around downtown around that time where people would just again, like Michael Shepard being one of those people, set up a sound system and play just on the street, kind of near the building that Bruce and I lived in. There was still a lot of spontaneity, despite whatever I had previously said about things getting more business-like.
Well, I mean, imagine getting a grant to put on a Swans Sonic Youth show nowadays. Like, it's just, again, it was a sign of the times of it being like, oh yeah, this is art, and we're going to take it seriously, and you need some funding for it, and it's going to be in a cool location. I mean, that's kind of incredible.
I also don't know why we didn't get any film footage of it. When I look back on it, like, whoa, what was going on there? But anyway, I guess we were just busy putting on shows and not.
Right.
Well, I'll share my little story that I had bought a used coat on Melrose just before the Swans show in the furniture building, and it was not a warm situation. There was no heat or AC. It was just kind of a shell of a building. So I go in there with this brand new coat that someone told me was an Everly Brother coat from the family that the daughter had just basically given away. And I was like laughing, going, oh, come on, that can't be true. But apparently it was true. And it was a coat with like stitched buttons, not zipper. And I'm watching Swans. And by the time they're done, I look at the floor and all the buttons are on the floor. I just unknowingly had ripped every button off of the coat by twisting around to them. They were so fixating for me. And I'm not kidding about this. And I picked up all the buttons and put them in the pockets and had them reinstalled later. And that is a true story from that Swan show.
Oh, I love it. Incredible. And this was also the night that Boon died.
Right.
And which is a big part of the film. He's so prominent in the film in terms of his spirit and, brilliance. And I still remember where I was when I found out he died. We were playing a show in a basement and I just couldn't get over it. I just had never had anyone who was kind of a musical hero pass like that. It was just shocking. And it must have been devastating for everyone in the scene.
Yeah. I mean, what a great person, in addition to being talented on so many levels, just a really, charismatic person that, was always there for others as well. And I mean, for me, that kind of had a centrifugal effect where between having done this show and then Boon dying on the same night in a car crash, just to be clear. So, I was surprised when other people like filmmaker Dave Markey said the same thing. Like, yeah, just things were never the same again, because we'd never really actually talked about it until I sat down to interview him. But yeah, I thought he expressed that really well.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you if there was a show that you could have produced in a certain location that you never got to, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, the one answer that I have for when after doing screenings, sometimes people ask that, and I always look like Butthole Surfers would have been really fun to have done a show with. But what would be the ultimate environment for them? Because again, I would want to. I've been thinking that a volcanic crater would have been a great spot to do a show.
Yes.
And I've never done that. So maybe the Butthole Surfers in a volcano crater with fire, and that might be one.
And then you got to get like Frank to open, because you got to have it be really, Joanna Went could do some stuff.
Definitely.
And then, Eugene Chadbourne, and call it a night.
Uh-huh.
Well, the film and what you did, what all of you did is amazing. It's just a really exciting moment in time, but also very inspiring. I watched it with my daughter, who was blown away by just the freedom in it and just the heart, and also just the ability to just be like, let's just try it. Let's not worry about it. It's gonna work out. And then the surprise that it does, instead of everything just being all nice and tidy. I really love that the film really captures that.
Well, yeah, and for me, those shows, especially the first two, were a huge peak experience for me to have been involved in those and perform in those, and then to see what Stuart was able to pull together with. It's such a compelling story, and it's so well told. Stuart, he's a fantastic job on the film. So really, pleased to.
Thanks so much. And I'm glad that you feel that way because you're so integral to all of it. And, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I have every chance I get to tell somebody about it, I will. So.
Well, at the end of every interview, I ask the same question, but I tailor it to the film we're talking about. And what I'll probably do is I'll ask each of you for on a scale from 1 to 10, and then I'm going to average it out, but I'm hoping it's a high number. On a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how many school buses full of punk rockers do you give this film?
I gave it a 10 because it's as perfect and flawless of a journey in film that one can take of a moment in time that is hard to believe even existed.
Yes.
And it's an oddity in itself, and that's what's so great about it. It's so beautiful about it. And it really, there is no fluff in it. It is beginning to end, like, exciting. So I'm serious. I personally gave it a 10, not because, as I tell people, I could have ended up on the floor, on the cutting room floor, and I still would have, because it was just, I didn't know this footage existed, and it was so fun to go back to it. But also the footage of the places I was never in, fascinating. It was just fantastic.
I think you graded it perfectly. I had 10 here. That's exactly what I had. It's the right answer. And I it's unfair to ask you to, maybe because you made it, but
yeah, that's
but I think that's the right answer. Skip, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
I do feel this is an incredible film. I've seen it several times. You're right. There's no fluff in this film. Stuart, you made something that just flows and it's exciting. And the fact that when I watched it the first time, I didn't know that you had directed it. And at the end, I was like, oh my gosh, the person's story is the person who directed it. That is hard to do. You did it really effortlessly, and it's really beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. And I do want to point out that films don't get made by one person. And, like so many people contributed to making it the cool experience it is. But one guy in particular is Tyler Hubby, who is a really great film editor and a filmmaker himself. And so I brought this project to Tyler, and we really collaborated together to, okay, this needs to go. That's a funny story from your friend. Forget it. It can't be in there, And so it was great to have somebody to collaborate on all that stuff with, but also cinematographers, Mariska was a huge factor in all this, and just anyway. So, but thanks, you guys. Great to hear,
Thank you so much for everyone for being on here. It means so much to me to get to talk about this amazing film and moment in time.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's been a great experience just talking about the film with you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday. We are a completely independently produced affair, so the best way to support us is to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app and to subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get exclusive weekly bonus episodes every Sunday, as well as one-of-a-kind handmade Revolutions Per Movie goods that I send out to you. You can follow the show on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and find more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!